First question that I'd like to ask is if you could just give a quick layman's introduction to what e-participation is.
Okay. Well, e-participation is about the new digital technologies that allow us to communicate in different ways from those who were generally dominated by the press and by television. And the big difference is that these are interactive technologies, so it's not just a one-way flow of communication. And people are more able to set their own agenda, decide what it is they want to talk about, how they want to have that discussion. And it's not just one-to-one, but it's many-to-many. So networks of communication start to emerge.
Okay, and how new is it really? I mean, I imagine it's very much facilitated by the internet, but is it still a kind of quite new idea within the internet itself?
Yeah, I mean, when the internet came along, I think people didn't quite know what was going to be done with it. Some people thought it was going to be a business technology, it's going to be about selling things. Some people thought it was going to be a government-run technology. But it became very clear that there were two overwhelming uses for the internet. One of them was the sort of day-to-day sociability, emails, the kind of discussion that allows people to keep in touch with members of their families, to create new friends. So that's the sociability side of it. And then there's a sort of an information gathering side, because the internet created this abundance of information. In the past, information had been scarce, and suddenly people found that they could get hold of lots of material that they couldn't have previously found. And putting those two things together, sociability and information, what is happening in terms of participation is to do with politics, civil society, what it's like to be a member of a society in which decisions have to be made. Can the internet in some respects enable people to get closer to that process, to the process of making decisions, holding politicians to account, thinking about questions of social value?
In Australia, we've got quite an organisation called GetUp. The idea is you can meet on the internet or have a main internet network, and you're trying to affect change in the kind of real world. Is that a trend in e-participation, do you see? They're trying to link the online and the offline?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And there is an absolute and inseparable link between the online and the offline. I mean, you cannot just live your life on the internet, and so the internet is used as part of sociability that doesn't only occur virtually, but occurs in when people meet each other, make friends with each other, and information that doesn't only exist as text online, but exists as part of what you do in your real life. So this is exactly an example of trying to get people to feel more ownership of democracy, because we live in this political system where most people haven't got a clue what's going on. They don't know how they can change things. They don't know what the politicians are talking about, and they certainly don't think the politicians are talking to them.
We've recently had an election in Australia where online campaigns played a fairly significant part, at least in terms of politicians trying to get to voters in this kind of online sphere. You've talked about how e-participation can break down hierarchies and things like that. Do you think there will basically be a scramble to kind of make it into a hierarchy, the traditional political spheres from outside the internet coming in and establishing themselves there?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, power never changes because of the technology. You have a very dynamic process here. And the political parties, governments, have gone into the internet and attempted to institutionalize it so that it operates according to their rules. And people don't like that. People say, well, hang on, if we're socializing in different ways and becoming informed in different ways and learning in different ways, why can't we be involved in government in different ways? Why can't we make decisions in different ways? And it's an ongoing battle, and over the last 10 years, what has been so interesting about the internet and e-participation is that at the one side, you've had these dynamic new networks, people doing things in different ways, talking in different styles, trying to address different issues. And on the other side, of course, you have had the old hierarchies trying to impose themselves in this space, but essentially not really quite catching on to what's been happening.
How would you suggest then that you can invest? Because I mean, imagine governments from their perspective of where to spend taxpayers' money, and also the private sector. They're wondering how can we kind of get into these digital networks? How can people invest in it yet keep that kind of sustainable, almost underground kind of feel?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think that what governments have got to do is something they are absolutely unfamiliar with doing. It goes completely against their ethos, which is not to try to lead, but to follow. What they need to do is to look at where people are actually congregating online, looking at how people are actually expressing themselves online. And we want to learn from you. We've got questions we need to ask you. We've got things we need to explain to you. The great problem is every time we go to talk to a government, they will say, we need a debate about the environment. So we're going to ignore all the debates about the environment that are taking place, and we will set up the government environmental space. Or we needed a debate about young people and drugs, and young people are talking about drugs in a variety of ways, often quite mature and sophisticated ways, but we're going to do it quite differently, and we're going to tell them what we think. And it's an ethos that needs to change. It is a fundamental culture change in governance that the internet presents us with, I think, because it is not like seeing a website as a private television channel that government or a corporation can promote itself through.
That's definitely one of the standout things when you look at how governments have used YouTube or something like that through the last election, especially here. It's like they basically used it so they could have unfettered press releases coming through.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the great danger is it kind of starts to look like, you know, those old black and white films of Soviet politicians going to rock concerts where, you know, these are kind of, where are the kids? The kids are in the dance hall. We must go to the dance hall for 10 minutes, pretend that we're interested, and then we go back to our offices. And, you know, these sort of momentary appearances of middle-aged, balding men, like me, incidentally, on YouTube is pretty embarrassing. And I don't actually think it gets them anywhere at all. I mean, I think if you talk to them, as I have done, what the politicians will say is, but we have to do it, otherwise we will be seen to be somehow ignoring a trend.
One thing I have been reading about is Barack Obama's campaign in America, and actually them hiring one of the founders of Facebook to create a my.barackobama.com. Now that seems to be that they're using the kind of approaches that you're suggesting, in the sense that following rather than leading.
Yeah, I think that's what smart politicians are beginning to do now. I mean, I think there are greater and lesser degrees of ways in which politicians have used the internet, and Barack Obama, I think, has been a very good example. But, you know, I think it's also because he's got the symbolic politics going with him. I mean, there is a huge feeling in his particular case that there is something different that could happen. I mean, it is not a medium in which institutional politics, as usual, work very well.
The idea of e-participation, well, people can kind of grasp what it is, which, you know, essentially requires them to think, oh, it must be like email or something else. Do you think that people are looking at the internet just in a general way as this is an avenue for e-participation rather than basically socialization? How do you make that switch?
Yeah, well, I think that's an extremely interesting question, because I don't think that e-participation has that much to do with technology. I mean, at one level it does. It's defined by technology, because in fact we're saying, why don't we use this technology to do this? But I think it's a cultural problem of participation that is much, much more complicated between socializing and participating. And I think it's a completely crazy separation. And I think it's one of the reasons why young people are quite right to feel disengaged from politics, because politics is actually disengaged from sociability. I mean, why shouldn't participation be fun? Why shouldn't participation be part of everyday culture? Why shouldn't it be about the way in which we really like to express ourselves? Why do we have to go into this absurd kind of political rhetoric, this rhythm of sort of frenetic control every time we talk about political ideas?